Australia's agriculture leaders face off in a pre-election debate. Join National's Agriculture Minister David Littleproud and Labor's Shadow Minister Joel Fitzgibbon as they discuss their plans to grow Australia's farm industries. That's today at the National Press Club in Canberra. David Littleproud and Joel Fitzgibbon.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Press Club and today's Westpac address. I'm David Spears. Our club president, Sabra Lane, will be back tonight for the leaders' debate. Of course, that's 7:30 this evening right here. This afternoon, we have another of our campaign debates, and today it's agriculture, a vital industry for the Australian economy, but one that is facing some particular challenges right now. So to debate its future, please welcome Agriculture Minister David Littleproud and Shadow Minister Joel Fitzgibbon. In fact, gentlemen, I invite you to shake hands.
Good luck, brother.
Why not? Let's break the ice. Okay, we did. No, we did have a coin toss earlier on. The Minister, David Littleproud, is going to go first, and we'll hear from him first when we get to the closing statements as well. So, Minister, over to you.
Well, thank you, David. And can I firstly acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet? Can I also acknowledge Joel, to the Press Club, to the NFF for organising today. But today I was given the opportunity to invite two guests, and I'd like to acknowledge Cam and Carolina, two young farmers. Today, it's about them. It's about their industry, the legacy of their industry, about the future of their industry. For far too long, we've had generations of young Australians drained out of regional rural Australia, drained out of agriculture. Well, today, it's about bringing our young people home. 15 months ago, I was given the opportunity to become the Australian Agriculture Minister, to be part of that legacy, to be part of that future, to face up to the challenges that agriculture have, but to embrace the opportunity for the next generation. I'm proud of the way that we as an industry have faced up to these challenges, whether it's the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. For the first time in our nation's history, we have agreement from the Basin States and the Commonwealth in the management of the Murray-Darling, the biggest environmental program in our nation's history, to be able to bring together, without politics, leadership, to do the heavy lifting with getting the Sustainable Diversion Limit, the Northern Basin Review, a social and economic test on on the 450 upwater, for the fringe dwellers there that want to tear this down, and now for the opposition to want to play politics after bipartisanship, to bring back buybacks, a blunt instrument that tears jobs out of communities and pits regional communities against city communities. It's time to have leadership. It's time to back ourselves, to back the infrastructure and the technology to give the water back to the environment in a new way, not with a blunt instrument of destroying regional communities. I'm also proud of the way that we've handled the live trade. We've looked to the science, the new science around animal welfare, but practical measures around independent observers, and now to have third-party appointment of vets away from employees of the export companies to give greater transparency and confidence to the community around this trade. We have a moral responsibility to stay and get it right, because if it's not our cattle and sheep, it's the sheep and cattle of another nation that don't always have the standards and values that we do. So we shut our eyes and turn our back and think it's going away. It won't. We effectively are saying that we value the life and the welfare of an Australian animal over an animal from another nation. That's not the Australian way. We stick the course, we get the job done. Can I also say I'm proud of the fact that we stood up against the activists, those people that perpetrated information to let animal activists attack innocent Australian farming families. Proud to say we took them on. It's now time for the states to stand up, to change the culture and to attack those activists that attacked innocent farming families. These just aren't farms. These are people's homes where children live. And if Joel and I and 100 of our best mates stormed a house here in Canberra with our phones going, we'd have the cuffs on, we'd be in the clink in 30 minutes. Well, let me tell you, that should happen to these people as well. Farming families deserve the same protection as anyone in this country, and it's time the state stood up and did their bit. I'm also proud of the fact I stood up to the supermarkets, despite criticism. The fact is, they have a part to play in the dairy industry. They've got to do some heavy lifting and they're not out of the woods yet. I'm going to be asking them to go further. But I've got to do my bit. I put in place a dairy code of conduct. I've also put in place now a mechanism for us to explore a new market platform that brings the dairy industry in line with other industries to have greater market transparency but spread the power across the chain evenly. And I'm proud to say today we're also going to announce $10 million for the dairy industry to be able to take advantage of energy efficient equipment, $8 million to ramp up the ACCC and have a dairy advocate within the dairy part of the ACCC, and $5 million to continue the work of co-ops to not only let dairy farmers but all farmers come together and market collectively to redistribute the balance of power in an equitable way. I'm also proud of the fact that I've written a wrong of agriculture. We excluded 50% of our intellect. I'm proud to say that I brought female government board representation from 37% to 47%, not with a quota, but by creating an environment where those brave women, those courageous women in agriculture can come forward and contribute as they should, and we're a better industry for it. I want to invest in the future, have a bright future for the next generation, to give those that want to come back on the land the opportunity through a new AgriStart loans, but also the new jobs in agriculture, the new jobs of research and development, to give our farmers the tools of the 21st century to adapt to a changing climate. That's why we're investing over $1.1 billion a year in research and development. But I've got to take the shackles away from those research and development corporations. We've gone from a $34 billion industry to a $60 billion industry in 8 years. They've done a fantastic job. But are they fit for future? Are they going to take us to the next generation of advancement in agriculture? Are they afraid to fail? It should be okay to fail. It's okay to fail. We should share those failures and learn from them and collaborate. So I want to empower and create another tier in agriculture, to have a centre of excellence in Australia where the brightest minds, the brightest human capital in the world can shine and take agriculture to the next sector. But what I also want to do is make sure that we reward the farmers for the stewardship of their land. They are the greatest environmental custodians of our land because their profit and loss is intrinsically tied to it. So I've created a stewardship fund that not just rewards them for carbon abatement, a blunt instrument. I want a sophisticated instrument that rewards them for the improvement of biodiversity, improving their riverways and gullies, building more in terms of getting back native species, flora and fauna. This is about rewarding them not just through the Climate Solutions Fund, but through a marketplace that is nationally and internationally recognised for the work that they've done. If we don't do it, we get left behind. We can lead the world by taking the lead in a biodiversity stewardship fund. So the opportunities are great. And to Cam and Caroline, I say thank you. Thank you for putting your faith in agriculture. And to those that are left, all I say, it's time to come home. Thank you.
Minister, thank you. Over to you, Joel Fitzgibbon.
Thanks, David. I also pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land and thank the Press Club, Westpac, the NFF and the ABC for putting agriculture at the centre of this important election campaign. The good news is only 10 sleeps to go, I think. Tony Marr from the NFF earlier today reminded us of their ambition to grow the value of the agriculture sector in Australia to $100 billion by 2030. The NFF also has an ambition for the sector to be carbon neutral by 2030. We believe they are great ambitions, and a Shorten Labor government will work with the NFF and all of its stakeholders and all of our primary producers to ensure we give ourselves the best chance to secure those aspirations. Now, are they realistic targets? I believe so. But will they be easy to secure? No, I don't believe so. It's going to take a lot of hard work and a lot of new thinking, a lot of change. A change in policy settings, attitudes and approaches. More long-term thinking, less short-termism. Now, it has to be said that we're not off to a great start. The ABS tells us that in the December quarter of last year, agriculture actually contracted by 5%. Now, no doubt that is largely attributed to drought. That is true. But when we consider that drought is probably going to be a regular feature of our climatic conditions, we cannot dismiss that December quarter contraction. Of course, climate change is not our only challenge. Indeed, there are many of them. Our natural resource base more generally is in decline. The river systems we rely upon to feed our main food bowl can no longer keep giving what we expect of them. Weather events more generally, hailstorms, storms generally, dust storms and floods are becoming more frequent and less predictable. The sector's productivity has been flatlining for almost a decade. It remains heavily exposed to the vagaries of global commodity markets. We are losing market share, not gaining market share. The sector can't secure the workforce it needs, and the workforce that exists is growing older. Our performance on the innovation and research front is suboptimal. Product development and production methods are falling behind consumer expectations and community attitudes. The sector's costs are high by international standards. As a country of only 25 million potential savers, we haven't been able to secure the capital we need to meet the aspirations we've been talking about. Now, despite this, the agriculture sector has a very bright future. A hungrier world and a wealthier world is providing many opportunities. But we won't fix our problems and overcome our challenges until we're willing to at first acknowledge them. To meet our aspirations, we need to be more honest with ourselves, and we need to be more open to change. There are so many challenges which we can actually turn into opportunities. We just need to learn to think, not shout, and need to innovate, not procrastinate. I submit there are at least 4 basic things we need to come to terms with if we are to meet those aspirations. The first is a changing climate and the state of our natural resource base. The second is the need to diversify our product markets and to pursue premium prices. The third is changing community attitudes and consumer expectations. And the fourth is the state of our research and innovation effort. In addition to coming to terms with these realities, we need strong government leadership and strong government guidance. We've had neither of those things over the course of the last 6 years. It's certainly not what we got out of the 2015 White Paper, a document in which policy ran a poor second to populism. People rightly lament the struggle we have to secure the capital we need to meet our aspirations. Some people will say, well, the investors don't understand our sector. Others say there isn't sufficient data available for people to make a decision. But sadly, I'm more inclined to believe what Gary Weaven had to say on ABC last year when he said, and I quote, "The returns are quite low in relation to the risk and volatility of the investment." Gary Weaven's words stay with me all the time. They are a guiding light for me in terms of policy development. And they remind me constantly that governments don't create wealth, investors do. But whether they be self-employed farmers, our corporate farmers, our super fund managers, or indeed foreign investors, they'll only invest if they know they have a government serious about the sector and serious about taking the sector forward and modernising the sector. Now, if given the opportunity, a Labor government will focus on building investor confidence, restoring productivity growth and laying a path to sustainable profitability. We'll take meaningful action on climate change and develop market-based responses to drought, soil health and other natural resource-based issues. And we'll make it a win-win for farmers and allow them to earn revenue in the carbon economy. We'll remove barriers to investment, like those holding back investment in our tree plantations. Investors need to know that they'll have a workforce available to deliver the returns they need. We'll research where the gaps are and we'll work with the sector to fill those gaps. We'll keenly and energetically pursue fairer market access without turning a deaf ear to the non-tariff barriers. Labor has a strong record on infrastructure investment, on roads and bridges and telecommunications. We've invested before and will invest heavily again. and will protect our reputation as a provider of clean, green, safe, high quality, ethically produced food by making sure we have the best biosecurity system in the world. We'll invest more heavily in research, but make sure the dollars are well spent. David Littleproud and I can agree on one thing at least. That is that we can't have a strong national economy without strong regional economies. And we can't have a strong regional economy if we don't have a strong agriculture sector. So let's get past the chaos and get on with it. And can I just quickly, please, David, acknowledge both Laurie Bratton and John Kerrin in the room, both outstanding Labor legends, outstanding cabinet ministers, and if I can be half as good a minister in agriculture as John Kerrin was, if given the chance, I will be a very happy individual.
All right.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too.
And indeed, it is good to see former ministers here today. Let's get into the questions then. Joel Fitzgibbon, you talked about climate change and Labor's plans to take meaningful action on climate change. Part of that is rolling out national land clearing rules, replicating the Queensland rules. Farmers, some, are quite concerned about this. Can I ask for a bit more detail as to how this will work, and importantly, will farmers be compensated for the impact it will have on the value of their property? And perhaps, Minister, a response, are you satisfied that we have it right at the moment with land clearing?
Well, we are hoping to put 10 years of carbon wars behind us, Dave. We have a very robust policy. We've excluded the agriculture sector, I think, very responsibly. In fact, we've done that each time we proposed a policy. We'll put them in the carbon market. We'll spend $40 million creating methodology so that they can earn revenue out of the carbon market. The land sector provides the cheapest offsets. Our farmers will be creating them when we get those methodologies right. This is the best defence to drought, building resilience on farm through the carbon market. We've also got a $100 million farm productivity and sustainable profitability fund, which will help them build that resilience. We are not rolling out national laws on land clearing, but we are determined that lowest cost abatement remain available and indeed grows in the market. What we have said is that we won't hesitate to use the Commonwealth's powers when typically Conservative state governments are winding back the clock and winding back land clearing laws that we've developed over a number of years. So, for example, in Queensland, where our political opponents like to shout loudest on this issue, nothing changes because we are satisfied that the laws in Queensland on native vegetation, land clearing generally, are robust and acceptable. So there is no change in Queensland. But again, we won't hesitate. If Conservative governments are doing the wrong thing and they have reckless native vegetation laws, not consistent with our aspirations to both tackle climate change, both on mitigation and adaptation, and helping farmers build resilience, then we won't hesitate to move against them.
Can I just clarify on this? Is this a changed position? You're no longer seeking to replicate Queensland's laws in other states, or you're now saying that you'll only act if a state waters down their existing laws?
This is not a change in policy. This was always the policy. The one you've described was a figment of the imagination of our political opponents.
All right, Minister.
Well, let me just say the real answer to that is that if you're going to impose vegetation management laws, a nationalised approach, you are effectively locking up the potential of agriculture. You are taking away a farmer's right for their stewardship of their land. And what you're saying is that you're going to bank that carbon abatement and that credit in the government's pocket, not the farmer's pocket. They're not being rewarded for it. That's what's going to happen. And the fact they haven't done the methodology, the fact they haven't done the numbers, says to me this is on the run and it's populist. So agriculture isn't exempt from the 45% reduction in emissions. Labor's lying. The reality is this. The reality is this, is that you are going to get in place a system that will take away farmers' rights to make a living. And they haven't done the methodology, they haven't done the work. So if they haven't done the work, they might need another 3 years in opposition to do the sums and come to the Australian people with it. You've got to be honest with the Australian people if you want to be the next government. You can't slink your way through. Be honest. That's what's going to happen with vegetation management laws that they're going to impose right across this country.
Okay, thank you.
Do I get a rebuttal to that? Or
no, I'm sure we'll come back to this issue as well. Let's go to Kath Sullivan.
Hi there, Kath Sullivan from the ABC.
Mr Fitzgibbon, you've outlined Labor's plans for re-regulation of the Australian dairy industry. As we know, it's an industry under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress at the moment. And Mr Littleproud, you had some success with the $1 a litre milk at one stage, although it remains to be seen how long the supermarkets will adhere to that. I'm interested to hear how you think that you can support the Australian dairy industry and how, particularly in your case, Mr Fitzgibbon, a floor in the milk price would actually help an industry, given that we're likely to see the likes of Fonterra or Saputo perhaps just import more milk and undercut Australian producers.
Let's let the Minister go first this time.
Well, it's a cruel hoax. Let's be honest about this. We've had one of these schemes before with the wool. The reality is you set a floor price, it sets a price above what processors are prepared to pay, it gets a glut, and then effectively it all falls apart. And you're talking about a perishable product. There'll be a point where it just all falls apart. And the other dangerous and reckless thing of this is you tear away at the trade agreements that we put in place, not just for dairy, but for every commodity. This is a dangerous thing to do. You've got to go and tell people the truth, not tell them what they want to hear. And yes, the dairy industry's got a lot of work to do. And you know what? I did call the supermarkets out, and I'm going to keep calling them out because I'm worried that they're going to shirk. And I've got intelligence to suggest if Labor gets in, they're going to take their 10 cents off. Coles are already talking about it. They're already circling. We have to have structural reform. I've done that in a calm, methodical way with the Dairy Code of Conduct, now with a new mechanism in terms of market, having it the same and similar to what cotton and wheat get to undertake. This is about true purity of market. That's the only time a government should interfere in a marketplace. That's what we've got to do. And it's a multifaceted approach to this. And there's no silver solution at the start. And that's why the supermarkets have such a big part to play in this. And I'm really concerned about where our supermarkets will go with this. I asked them for time. I asked them to work with me. We're losing so many dairy farmers every day out of the industry because they can't hold on. And that's where the supermarkets have a social responsibility come with us. I'm doing my bit, but I need time, and I need to keep those farmers going. I'm not going to promise them falsehoods. I'd rather look them in the eye, tell them the truth, tell them what I can do and what I can't, and I'm not going to put a floor price in. That would be a falsehood. It would be dangerous not only to dairy, it'd be dangerous to agriculture.
Well, the problem with that, David, is that you've done nothing other than shout at the supermarkets, and we all know the supermarkets have a role to play. But, Kath, I wouldn't call our policy a re-regulation, but I just heard 1,000 dairy farmers applaud when that's what you called it. Because what they need and want is structural intervention from the government. We are losing our dairy industry. They are leaving en masse. And it's not an overstatement to say if we don't do something about it, we won't have a dairy industry in this country. We'll be importing even our drinking milk in powdered form. This is a serious issue that invites serious government consideration and government intervention. Now, shouting at the supermarkets is fine. You secure a temporary 10-cent levy, which diminishes over time. As sure as night follows day, when the media caravan moves on, David, the 10 cents will disappear. We've got no intention of having it disappear, but that's the reality of the market. We need structural reform. We've got a suite of policies, a mandatory code of conduct, a properly structured and developed one, which David still hasn't given the sector, a suite of policies, but the focus is the minimum farm gate milk price. It's the only way to ensure our dairy farmers have a living wage and know from one period to another what their income will be at least. If they know that, they can confidently reinvest in their farm system. They can lift their productivity and hopefully secure more sustainable profitability. Now, we've been responsible. We've said we'll have the ACCC test assess and help us design this. But I'm not asking the ACCC to tell us why it's too hard. I'm asking the ACCC to tell us how this best can be done. Now, David can stand here and keep shouting at the supermarkets, but the reality is I've been talking to dairy farmers in every corner of the country over the recent weeks, and none of them believe 10 cents a litre levy from the supermarkets is the answer to their structural and long-term problems.
David, can I just say...
We may come back to this, my apologies. I want to move on to the next question. Simon Gross.
Simon Gross, Canberra IQ. There's two issues come to mind that cut through beyond the sector, that cut through nationally. One is Murray-Darling to is animal welfare. I want you to imagine you're not in this room, there's no TV cameras, and you're addressing a group of Greens voters in Adelaide. I want you to give them...
David's done that before, I have.
I want you to give them your pitch for at least their second preferences, if not their first. On those two issues.
So animal welfare and...
Animal welfare and the Murray-Darling. Joel Fitzgibbon.
Well, if I was facing a big crowd of Green supporters, something I'm not experienced before, I would say honestly to them that they are right to be concerned about animal welfare standards. And producers need to be concerned about them too, because we do need to maintain that social licence. And the big investors are seeing this and they are moving. I was on Keith Talleck's winery on Friday. They've gone carbon neutral. Why? Because they know that's what consumers are demanding. You know, Hungry Jack's and McDonald's, they're changing their menus because they know that's what consumers are demanding. So I would say to them, you are right to be concerned. And as a government, we're going to answer that in a responsible way, not only to satisfy your concerns, I'm saying to the Greens, but also to help the industry ensure that they are meeting reasonable community expectations. So they're growing their market, so they're moving with consumer preferences. It's an important point. Murray-Darling Basin. I would also tell them they are right to be concerned about the Murray-Darling Basin. As I said in my opening, the river systems just can't keep giving. They can't keep doing what we've been asking of them. And you cannot grow anything out of a healthy river. So I would say to them, Labor will act and will act decisively as we've done before. We fathered the original 2012 agreement. But all these years on, we need to take a relook at it. And I would tell them we've not only taken a look, we'll not only go back to the science, but we will act. But we will act in the most responsible way so it benefits irrigators, growers, producers and regional communities.
Minister.
Well, thanks, David. And let me just say, with respect to animal welfare, the only thing to do is to do it right every time. And that's about making sure there's a strong regulator and there's a strong industry. A good culture in any industry does the right thing even when no one's looking. But when the regulator's not looking, we've got to go and sort that out too. I haven't been afraid to do that. But let me say, with respect to talking to Greens voters, my message won't change. You've got to be honest with people, not rush in and tell them what they want to hear and then leave. I'm not changing my mind. We're Australians, we can do this better than anybody. But we've got to prove it day in, day out. And when we get an outlier, we treat them as an outlier. They're a cancer and we cut them out. Simple as that. Because you know what? If we don't, we risk Carolina's future. So that's why it's important to have a strong regulator that's prepared to stand up and make sure it happens. But the industry themselves has to stand up. And I think as a whole we do. I think we've got to be loud and proud about what we do as farmers. We produce the most environmentally and ethically sustainable food and fibre in the world, and we should be damn proud of it. And these outliers, we should treat them as a cancer and remove them. With respect to the Murray-Darling, the one thing that I wanted to do when I became minister was take the politics out of it. Stop the yelling. I didn't call anyone names. Because those 2 million Australians, what they want an outcome. They're fatigued. They've had a gutful. They want government out of their lives. I've held a 68-year-old man who owned a business that's worth 3 parts of bugger all now, that's got no future because there's been uncertainty. I have responsibility to him and those other 2 million to make sure we get it right. And that's not always popular. I'm about as popular as a pox in some states at the moment, I get that. But you know what? You're going to have a worse plan if we blow it up. This is about leadership, not politics. This is a pivotal moment in delivering the biggest environmental program in our nation's history. We've come so far, and we shouldn't throw it away for some election campaign. We've got to be mature about this. This is why people hate politicians, because we politicise such important issues that mean so much to so many people.
Just to follow up on this point about the Murray-Darling, because it is a big issue in this election campaign in particular, Labor has announced that it wants to guarantee the delivery of an extra 250 gigalitres. Can you just clarify for us, Joel Fitzgibbon, would that come at the expense of irrigation communities? Would their concerns be taken into account?
Well, we've got to do this in cooperation with state governments, David. They are key players in this, and the internal water management plans are largely a matter for them. I've just got to say that David forgot to say that on his watch and Barnaby Joyce's watch, we've had non-compliance, possibly corruption, big payments for non-commissioning, which hasn't occurred. We've had fish kills in the Menindee. Things are really bad on his watch. Now, we do need a bipartisanship. We do need to get more environmental water into the system. There's no magic pudding. We need more environmental water. We've said we'll take the cap off buybacks, for example. Buybacks put money back into regional communities. The recent Royal Commission said, the PC has said before, it's the most efficient way of saving water. Remember, there's a $13 billion tax bill at stake here, so we've got to do it efficiently and responsibly, but it's all about getting water back into the system. There is no alternative solution.
David Littleproud, there have been concerns about, well, a couple of buybacks in particular. Are you satisfied everything was above board?
Well, that's why I've sent it to the Auditor General, not politicise it, not play politics. And I've said not only the one that's been questioned, 80 million, there's $330 million purchase that Penny Wong made. They should all be put under scrutiny. But you know what? I'm quite confident that everything will be above board. But I'm getting that independent umpire to have a look, not politicise it, to actually be mature about this. And this is why you can't trust Labor with agriculture or water, because they don't understand it.
You're not politicising it, David.
Well, I'm sorry, you are. When you want to look at one purchase in isolation, that's politicisation. I'm sorry, the Australian people see that. I want to look at them all. But the reality is, if you are saying you want to put more water back to the environment, the only way to do that is through a blunt instrument with buybacks. They destroy communities, and you are pitting regional communities against city communities because the city doesn't understand this plan. And those people out there are hurting in those towns, and that's the instrument that they want to use. They don't want to back ourselves with the technology of the 21st century in terms of infrastructure to give the delivery of the water. They want to just use a blunt instrument because it works for a message in Adelaide.
OK, time's up for that one. Let's go to the next question from Mike Foley.
Mike Foley, Australian Community Media. You've both spoken about the health of rural communities, but we've seen several decades of deregulation, free market reforms, push for corporate capital to fund industry growth, and the death of many smaller family farms and of the communities around them. We haven't seen any specific policies from either party to address that trend. The water market is drowning smaller family farms in the southern Murray-Darling Basin and in many other industries across the nation as well. So what my question is, do farmers need to get corporate or get out? If not, if you say they don't need to do that, give us some specifics about how your government would reverse that trend.
Minister, to you first.
Well, you're more pessimistic than me, Mike, because I live in Western Queensland. Let me tell you, we're a nation of 25 million people. We produce enough food for 75 million people. If we don't engage the world, if we don't trade with the world, you don't need those communities. Let me tell you, the trade agreements that we put in place, China, Japan, Korea, TPP-11, Nepal, TPP, those trade agreements are putting real dollars in people's pockets, and they flow through regional communities. Our job as a government is to put the environment and infrastructure people, not to create the wealth for them. They do it for themselves. That's our job, and that's what we've done. The trade agreements are so important, and I've seen that firsthand. We're making sure that we're sensible around foreign investment, because you know what? I do believe in the family farm. I want to see Cam and Carolina be able to get their start. That's why we put $2 million up for Agri-Starter loans to give them a crack. It's a huge capital impost to come into at the farm gate. What we're trying to say to them is, we'll give you a helping hand. We'll work for traditional banks to try and unlock that capital in a practical way. And that's what governments do. But we also make sure that we're protecting foreign investment that's in the national interest. Foreign investment is good, but it's got to be in our interests. And when it does come, they've got to pay their fair share of tax. What Labor's saying is they're going to lift the caps that we've put on, those thresholds, to make sure we have an oversight around the level of foreign investment and the concentration of foreign investment. We should decide the foreign investment. It's good. It should be good investment for this country. And that's why we've put those safeguards and thresholds in place to protect farming families, to have a crack, but where we can get foreign investment that works in our interest, we should.
Joel Fitzgibbon.
Well, Mike, I'll answer the question. The Prime Minister told the Drought Summit that sadly there'll be some farmers that won't make it, that just don't have a business proposition in a changing climate. It's an interesting sector. 80% of the output by volume comes from 20% of the firms or thereabouts. And the ABS tells us that 59% of farm entities have an annual turnover of less than $200,000. That's a turnover, not a profit. So there will be structural change, but it's not for government to determine the change, it's for its investors, the farmers themselves, to determine their future. Now, some of our best and smartest investors will be family farmers. Some of our best farmers will be family farmers. Some of our best investors will be the big corporates or will be the multinationals. So the market will determine. Our job is to put in place the enablers to give family farmers in particular the best possible opportunity. We also need to put in market-based mechanisms to ensure that our soil and water resources are going to the areas where they produce the greatest return, not only for the farmer, but for the country. And we do have an enormous resources misallocation in this country, and government should have a view about it. The other point I'd make is that it's sort of a circular thing. We'll keep our family farms if we have vibrant regional communities. They are part of that. But this election campaign is also about good health facilities, good education services, good community facilities, good NBN, good mobile connectivity. And if we, as government, put those things in place, we will help lift the vibrancy of local regional communities, and in turn we will help our farmers, who in turn will make their own additional contribution to the vibrancy of our rural towns.
Thank you. Our next question from Paul Karp.
Paul Karp from Guardian Australia. The Productivity Commission found that the Murray-Darling Basin Authority has a conflict of interest because it both is responsible for implementing the Basin Plan and compliance. Could I please ask both of you, do you support Susan Lee's call to split those responsibilities? And given the hit to community confidence in the plan, should there be a pause in it pending an inquiry?
Joel Fitzgibbon, you first on this one.
Well, this is the responsibility. I'm a little bit different than David. He has responsibility for water. I do not. Tony Burke does, and he, thankfully from my perspective, knows these things backwards, having both been an agriculture minister and a water minister and an environmental minister. We're open to that discussion. I'm sure I've heard the charge that there is a conflict of interest. What I do know, I'll leave that to Tony, but what I do know is that we need the very best regulatory regime we can put in place, and the public has to have confidence in that regime. So I would say if there's anything that's undermining confidence in the oversight of the Murray-Darling Basin, we should be looking at it and addressing it. I can't help myself but to note you mentioned Susan Lee. Susan Lee, of course, is in a little bit of trouble at the moment, mainly because of this issue. But it was Susan Lee, if we can go back to animal welfare, who proposed a private member's bill to phase out the live sheep trade, only to give up on that ambition after taking a position in the executive, and I thought that was a very disappointing outcome for the community.
Just to be clear, though, before I go to the Minister, you're open to both the pause in the plan and splitting the roles?
No, sorry, I thought we were talking about the regulatory oversight. I'll
Right.
leave that to Tony Burke. I'm not sure whether he's made any public comment about that.
But no pause
I'm
in
not
the
going
plan.
to. I'm not going to. No pause. No, we haven't got a, David, I've got time. We do not have a minute to lose. You know, we've just lost up to 6 years, or probably from the point when Barnaby Joyce became the water minister, which might only be 5 or so years ago. Barnaby Joyce did many things wrong, but his greatest crime was to unsettle the agreement of a plan. This is a fragile plan between the Commonwealth, the states and all the stakeholders who rely on the Murray-Darling Basin. It's very fragile, and when you upset it like Barnaby Joyce did, it's very hard to get it back. We are losing time. We don't have a moment to lose. We need to restore the integrity of the plan. We need to get that water flowing again, and we need to save those regional communities.
Okay, Minister, coming back to Paul's question specifically about splitting the roles of the MDBA and pausing the plan.
Well, we're open to the PC report, but it's not just our decision. You've got to understand we have to have the basin states agree with us. This isn't just my plan. This is this nation's plan. And that's why we haven't had progress, because politicians from all political persuasions have decided to play politics with it. I've taken that out of it. So we're going to sit down with the states and work through that. I'm agnostic. If we think we can get better outcomes in terms of compliance, then we will. But we've already taken steps in terms of compliance. I put a tough cop on the beat with Mick Kilty. He's now the Northern Basin Commissioner. He's out there making sure that compliance is upheld. We made a commitment of $25 million to meter the Northern Basin. Another $26 million to use the smarts of the 21st century, to use satellite technology, to use remote river sensing, to use cameras to make sure the flows are coming through, that they're protected, that there's integrity to the plan. You just don't go and politicise it and blow it up. You put structure around it. And you do that in a calm and decisive way. You don't yell at one another, but you're not going to get that unless you've got cooperation of the states. And that's what we've got. For the first time in our nation's history, We should be damn proud of that. We've got cooperation from the states and the Commonwealth and the management of the Basin Plan, so we shouldn't blow it up. We should use that as a stepping stone to build on the plan to make sure we deliver it, because people are fatigued. People up and down the plan are fatigued. They want out. They just want us to get it done, and I won't be pausing it. I've faced 100 angry irrigators in Shepparton. Easiest thing for a politician to do is to fly and tell people what they want to hear and never see them again. I'd rather look them in the eye, tell them the truth. You'll get a worse plan unless we keep delivering this. You'll get a worse plan if we continue to get the politicisation. This is now about leadership. This is not about personalities. This is not about trying to pick someone off against the other. We're to rise above that as a nation. You know what? Oh, well, hold on, Joel. With all due respect,
no, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, with all due respect, it's good to agree in silence sometimes. So, with all due respect, this is where we've lost the confidence of the community, and it's time that we put it back on track with leadership.
Can I just come back to the point about whether there is a conflict of interest at the Murray-Darling Basin Authority right now? You are the federal minister. You said you're agnostic, but surely you can have a view on this. Is there or not?
Well, no, not necessarily that I'd say stridently that that's the case. But if I have evidence put in front of me, then I'm prepared to look at it. I think you have to be very careful about rushing into presumptions, and this is where we run into this murky water, pardon the pun, with the Basin Plan, is that we like to blame, quick to blame individuals rather than taking a step back and getting the facts and letting science do the talking.
Let's go to our next question. Matt Coughlin.
Matt Coughlin from Australian Associated Press. Joel, Tony Marr said last month that based on your previous media statements, he thought that you were in favour of an ag visa. And David, last week your leader Michael McCormack told me that if re-elected he would fight for an ag visa in Cabinet despite the PM going a bit cold on the issue. Joel, first to you, do you commit to an ag visa if Labor's elected, and how do you manage concerns within the union movement about a new type of visa that brings overseas workers into the country?
Well, thanks for the question. I believe workforce is the second biggest challenge for the agriculture sector after climate change, drought and the natural resource space. And I commit to doing something about it. I can't, as a potential minister, declare it the second biggest challenge and then not act in government, and I will. It requires a whole of government approach across so many ministers, obviously the immigration minister, the foreign minister, given the interaction with the Pacific Island programs, the workplace relations minister. But we have to act, and we have to act very, very quickly. We've got gaps both in the unskilled area and in the skilled area. We've seen the government support the so-called ag visa and then not support it, and they supported it, and now they don't support it. And that's because it is complex, and with all the resources of government, they haven't been able to provide the answer. But I'm determined that if given the opportunity, we will. And to give you a bit of guidance, I've been having a close look at the New Zealand model. You probably know Dr. Joanna Howes from the University of Adelaide did an extensive report on this, and she identified a number of things, including the way the holiday worker making program was not only leading to exploitation, but disadvantaging Australian workers. But in New Zealand, the core of the New Zealand model is a tripartite approach. Industry, government and unions working together. And they've had an enormous success rate. We have 10 backpackers to every Pacific Islander. They have 2 to 1. The regulatory burden on the employer, the farmer in this case, is higher than you would hope. They take most of the responsibility for the compliance, but the farmers don't mind because the system works for them. And on day one, I'll be having yet another look at the New Zealand system, looking for guidance from it. Obviously, our situation is somewhat different to theirs, but I think that guidance will be very helpful as we work towards a solution for the sector.
All right, Minister.
Well, look, I'm on the public record as strongly supporting an ag visa. In fact...
but it's not your policy, David.
Well, Joel, again, in silence, please, brother. With all due respect, the reality was I'm prepared to stand up for it, and some of my colleagues were prepared to make that public. But the Prime Minister is now on the journey as well. And in fact, the NFF Congress, he made a commitment to working towards an ag visa. But you just don't rush into it and have unintended consequence. You've got to make sure. You've got to make sure that you don't have an unintended consequence on your immigration policy, whereby we are there to protect you, the Australian people, and we're also there to protect those farmers to make sure that they get the labour when they need it. That's the reality. There's over 200,000 people come in through the Holiday Maker program. Let me tell you what Joel's not telling you is that the AWU, we extended out to a 2-year visa. What the AWU want to do is cut it back to 1 year. So what do you think is going to happen after the election when Bill Shorten takes a lodge? God help us if he does. The reality is you're going to bring it back to 1 year, and then our farmers are going to start to have to compete with other nations like Canada and New Zealand. There's a shortage as it is now. So the reality is you start tinkering with that the way that they're not telling you. The unintended consequence of a union running the country is you're going to see that farmers are going to have to leave fruit on the vine. That's the stark reality, because we are in a competitive globe. Can't run away from it. So we've got to be sensible and methodical. We're working through with Pacific Islander nations, making sure we get the visa system right there, extending the holiday worker program broadly. But I'm a believer in an ag visa, and I know the PM wants to move towards it because it also gives protection to those workers that make sure that those that have been exploited don't. We have an oversight. And that's why you've got to do it in a calm and methodical way, that we protect Australians, but we also get the fruit off when we need it.
Can I just follow up on that, because I'm a little confused, to be honest. You've said you support an ag visa. You now say the Prime Minister's on the journey. Is there going to be an agriculture visa if you're re-elected or not?
So long as we can get to the point that the science proves it, and yes, we will, because that's why we've invested in the last budget over $3 million in a workforce planning model.
Sorry, what needs to happen?
So we need to have an understanding, David, of exactly where the pressure points are in the agricultural sector to make sure that we can manage it and we can do it properly.
Do you not have that now?
Not to the extent, because I can tell you now, you can go down to Victoria now and start to see where they were picking grapes about 3 or 4 months ago. There are a number of illegal workers there. The system needs to be fixed, but you need to do that in a calm and methodical way. And that's what we're working through with ABARES, to make sure that we can do that. And we can work with Immigration Department to make sure there's no unintended consequence. You don't want, well, you asked me to go on, you don't want an unintended consequence. We're letting someone in this country that does harm to our nation. That is the government's first responsibility, is to keep its people safe.
Okay.
And that's what we're going to do.
With every visa. But Joel, a little unclear too, is Labor going to introduce an ag visa or not?
Well, I understand you're being unclear about David. I mean, on the journey, you know what that's code for, don't you? I'm glad he's not rushing in. He's had 6 years, but he's asking for 3 more years to do some more study.
But what about Labor? If we can just come to Labor, will there be an ag visa?
Well, there'll be a policy.
What does that mean?
No one can tell me, David, what an ag visa is. No one can tell me what an ag visa is.
You could?
I'll tell you what it needs. It needs a fresh approach, it needs flexibility, it potentially needs re-entry. So if you're training workers, they can come for a second or a third time, for example. I would like that. Okay. But unlike David, I'm admitting that we don't have a fixed policy position because they've had the resources of government and haven't been able to land somewhere, and I'm not going to try to do it from opposition. But he just can't stand there and say he supports an ag visa, but his Prime Minister's on the journey. His Prime Minister backed down from his commitment at the National Farmers Congress. He backed down within days from that position.
All right.
He's had an opportunity to back the ag visa. He hasn't done so. It is complicated.
Let's go to our next question from Michael Keating.
Michael Keating from Keating Media. My questions to both gentlemen. Professor Mark Dussendorf of the University of New South Wales has said that radical cuts to emissions will be needed if we were to try and meet the 2-degree reduction target of the Paris Agreement, even if we had 100% renewable energy. What will this mean for the agricultural sector if we try and meet that target?
Minister, to you first.
Well, look, agriculture accounts for about 13% of emissions, and what Labor's saying is they want to cut emissions by 45% across the board. They're trying to tell us that we're exempt. Well, nationalised vegetation management laws do not mean that, because it means that you are taking carbon abatement out of farmers who have to lock up their land, the productivity of their land, and what it means is they don't make as much money, but the money they're going to make, they're going to put in their pocket. They're not going to give you the carbon abatement. You've got to go into one of their schemes. This isn't an opt-in scheme, the nationalised vegetation management laws. This is an arbitrary law that's going to impose their will on you without paying for it. That's the reality. And the fact they haven't even modelled it to know how much carbon they'll abate from this, how much money they're going to take out of farmers' pocket and put in theirs, shows they're not ready for government. They haven't done the sums. They might need another 3 years to go and do them in opposition. This is the dangerous thing about climate policy You've got to make sure you're prepared to do the sums. You've got to be honest with the Australian people about the costs. We've made a commitment to meet our international targets. We're not running away from that. But you've got to do that in a calm and sensible way so that farmers can turn their pumps on. And you know what? People can turn their air conditioners on. That's a responsible thing to do for government. It's great to have an ideological view. We all do. We all want a cleaner environment. We all need to do our bit. But let me tell you, you've got to come up with the numbers. If you want to be the alternative government, if you want to say to the Australian people, trust us, you've got to be able to prove it. Prove it with fact. If you can't prove it with fact, you're not ready to govern.
Joel Fitzgibbon.
Well, that was a lot of rubbish, David. He obviously doesn't understand the policy, or he just can't help but fall back into the political spin. Imagine a farmer struggling in drought who accepts an invitation from an investor to plant pines on his land. They'll make an environmental contribution to his land, by the way, but it'll give him a revenue source. It's a good resilience to drought. It's sort of like an off-farm income. He might be able to improve the carbon content in his or her soil. We'll give the baselines for that. We'll give the methodology so they can improve the health of their soil, improving the carbon content, and then improving the soil moisture. If we can baseline where he or she started from, he or she can earn income from the carbon market. That's what we're about, giving them revenue opportunities. Now, people want us to take serious action on climate change, and our 45% target is more than reasonable. In fact, it's below the international benchmark. Now, people in this room, the NFF, Meat and Livestock Australia, together have a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2030. That's more ambitious than our policy. And we're about to give, if we're elected, MLA $2 million to help them further progress the research they need to get there, because, of course, the biggest part of the emissions come from the red meat sector. And if we can improve the outcome of the red meat sector, it'll be the easiest path to reaching our ambition. So people want us to take action. Taking action will be a good thing for farmers, both on the mitigation and adaptation side. It will improve their productivity on farm, and potentially, if they're interested, they can secure new revenues. Now, but he has a policy. Richard Colbeck supports me, by the way, he's junior minister. He has a policy that only allows farmers to plant trees where there's not enough rain to grow them. Not enough rain to grow them. We're going to remove that so-called water rule so that they can earn income. Richard Colbeck supports me, David Littleproud does not.
The problem we've got, David, is if it's so important, as Giles just quite clearly articulates, so passionate about, give us the number. Give us the number. What have you done the work?
Let me ask this
What
question.
have you been doing? You're talking about what we've done for 6 years. What have you been doing, mate?
Okay, let me ask
Where's
this question.
your
Joel
numbers?
Fitzgibbon,
Where's your methodology?
carbon farming, how much emissions reduction or abatement do you want to achieve through carbon farming?
Well, how long's a piece of string? As much as is possible. Well, the MLA and the National Farmers Federation haven't been asked to cost their aspiration. It's impossible to measure. But the farmers aren't in the safeguard mechanism. They're carved out of the system. The only thing they face are opportunities to earn revenue in the carbon economy.
Well, so this is two different mechanisms.
Okay,
David,
Minister, I could ask you the same question, because under the government's Climate Solutions Fund, you're using taxpayers' money for the same thing. So how much emissions abatement do you want to achieve through carbon
we've
farming?
costed it, David. We've said we're going to put an extra $2 billion into this.
How much for carbon
farming? You've costed what you're putting in of taxpayers' money.
Exactly, and that's why it's a blunt instrument. Carbon farming at the moment is a blunt instrument. In fact, it has unintended consequences, David. Even in my own electorate, what's happening is that investors are coming in, some of them foreign, simply coming in and buying large tracts of land that have low capital value, making it as a passive income stream, and effectively taking families out of these communities and not managing it. That's why it's a blunt, simple system. I want to make it sophisticated. I want to trust Australian farmers to do the stewardship of their land, and I want to reward them. I want to reward them with a premium.
You are using taxpayers' money for the same carbon farming.
I want to use both. You're not understanding that.
I'm just asking how much emissions abatement, this is the point you've demanded an answer from, how much emissions abatement do you want to achieve?
So we've said that we want to get to 26 to 28%. That's what
through carbon farming, it's the point you're making against Joel Fitzgibbon.
So that's why we're saying that we want to have a far more sophisticated instrument than carbon farming.
So you don't have a number?
No, because I'm doing the methodology on that now to have a far more streamlined thing, not just goes for carbon, but biodiversity. Think about the improvement of the environment, David. That is what we want to reward our farmers for, is not just a simple instrument of carbon abatement, but to pay a premium for the improvement of the biodiversity of shelter belts, riverways, gullies. We have more biodiversity.
So you'll come back to us after the election with that number.
We've started $34 million and a certification scheme that will prove to the Prime Minister of the Environment that we need to see that the Climate Solutions Fund of that $2 billion. We've costed ours. These guys haven't given the cost. They haven't said how much they'll save. They haven't done anything. Okay. They said they're ready and this is the most important issue, but they can't tell us what it's going to cost us.
All right, let's go to the next question from Tim Shaw.
David, thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your address. Tim Shaw, Radio 2CC here in Canberra and a member of the Press Club board. Can we talk about the Australian farming families? And my question's directed to Joel Fitzgibbon. They're trying to survive drought, flooding rains. Labor has some very, very, very challenging tax plans ahead. I'd like you to comment on how your Labor tax plans are going to affect farming families of Australia. I'm sure the Minister will have a view on that as well. But they're individual family businesses, they're small businesses, and following on from Mike's point, you know, get corporate or get out. That's pretty scary for generational farming families. Joel Fitzgibbon, your impact, your Labor tax plans on farming families in Australia.
Thanks, Tim. Members of the National Party often boast that they represent the poorest members of our community. And on any measure, that's true. That is true. The National Party, last time I checked, represented about 9 of the 10 poorest electorates in the country. So our tax plan is good news for them, because our tax plan is taking a lot of money out of wealthier people by closing tax loopholes and redirecting that into fairer tax cuts, which are focused on low and middle income families. So that's a good thing, because axiomatically, the people David and others represent are lower to middle income families. But we're also taking that money to do some things I was referring to earlier. We're going to make sure the local hospital and health system is a good one. We're going to make sure that their children can access the very best of education. We're going to invest more in telecommunications so people have connectivity, because you can't grow more vibrant as a region without connectivity. We're going to make sure regional people, I just announced one in my own electorate, have access to their cancer treatment right near their home, rather than travel long distances, in my case from Singleton to Newcastle for their ongoing treatment. So everything we are doing is good news for those in the agriculture sector and those in those rural towns which are struggling. And in my experience, the towns that do best are those with strong, innovative local leadership, but have benefited from the enablers that the Commonwealth Government and the state government gives them. And that's exactly what our tax plan will do.
All right, Minister.
Well, David, I used to be a bank manager, and let me tell you that family farms are not just sole traders and partnerships. They're also family trusts. And this crowd are going to get into them. And you know what? Our job is to empower our nation. We've got our first surplus in 12 years, and we're going to pay a dividend out of that back to the Australian people, because we believe if we put it back in your pocket, you're the ones that create the jobs. The 1.2 million jobs that we've created, because we've empowered you. We put the environment around you. The only jobs government create, you pay for anyway. So it's important that we do empower our agricultural sector and understand that the family farm will always be there. There'll be fewer of them, but they'll be bigger. That's the way that we're moving towards, because they're the most productive and most profitable. And they're also the most profitable to our regional communities. They're the ones that employ people and put money through our local communities. So what this will do is shows there's an lack of understanding of what family farms actually look like in their structures. And that's dangerous. It's dangerous for regional communities, and it's dangerous for agriculture.
All right, our final question.